The views expressed on this program are those of IntellectualRadio.com, its subsidiaries, or sponsors. Encouraging, educating, and empowering you into action. This is Warriors Talk with your host, Lady Rochelle.
Hello. Welcome to Warrior Talk with author and founder Lady Rochelle, where we move away from awareness towards action. It is Health and Wellness Monday, and our topic for today is the power of advocacy. We are live on Intellectual Radio. We just heard from the Drive F5 with Roland. Keep it locked right here on Intellectual to feed your brain. On the last episode of Warriors Talk, Rosal and I discussed, are women expecting husband benefits from boyfriends? Head on over to YouTube and type in Intellectual Radio and stay connected for any episodes you may have missed. The quote of the day is, to be an activist is to speak. To be an advocate can't move forward without both. And that quote is by Eva Marie Lewis. Here is your trending topic for today. Historian Carter G. Woodson launched Black History Week in 1926 to recognize the significant contributions of African Americans during the second week of February, to coincide with the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. Congress expanded its National Breast Cancer History Month 50 years later during the National Bicentennial celebration, at which time then President Gerald Ford urged the country to seize the opportunity to honor the too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area of endeavors throughout our history. We are so grateful for our sponsor on today. We have Emmanuel Church of God in Christ with Pastor Michael Richardson, who has a special message for us.
Greetings, I am Pastor Michael Richardson.
And I am First Lady Anastasia Richardson from the Emmanuel Church of God in Christ. We're located at 3058 West Van Buren in Chicago, Illinois. We are building upon a solid foundation.
We're inviting us every Sunday morning on Facebook Live at Emmanuel at 10:15 Central Standard Time. And you can also view our videos on our YouTube channel at Emmanuel Kojic. Once again, this is Pastor Michael Richardson
and First Lady Richardson. And we're from the Emmanuel Church of God in Christ. We are building upon a solid foundation.
If you are tuned in on any form of social media, like the show, share the show, and invite someone else in on the show that you feel may benefit from this valuable information. My special guest today is a dedicated breast cancer activist and educator. She was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2014. She serves as an emeritus board member of the Virginia Board Cancer Foundation since 2017, advocating for patients and survivors in the Virginia General Assembly. Nationally, she is the board vice president and state field coordinator for the National Breast Cancer Coalition, champion research funding and policy changes to end breast cancer. A graduate and mentor of the National Breast Cancer Coalition Project Lead Institute, she has contributed as a consumer programmatic reviewer of the Department of Defense's medical research program. With a background in IT and training, she takes a practical approach to advocacy, supporting individuals nationwide. Welcome to Warriors Talk, Marilyn Miner. Hey, Marilyn.
Hey, Rochelle.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I'm excited about the interview on today. Thank you so much for coming on and being a guest on the show. I know that listeners are going to be blessed and they're going to be ready to take action after the interview.
I am grateful to you for the invitation to participate.
You're welcome. So I want to just jump right into the conversation. And I want to know what inspired you to be a breast cancer advocate and how has your journey evolved over the years?
It's interesting. I often look back on the day that I was given my diagnosis, which happened to be over the phone. My surgeon called. He was wonderful. And in spite of the fact that it was over the phone, I felt very cared for. It has everything to do with his style of working with patients. And somehow I knew that day that I wanted to give back in some way. I had absolutely no idea what that would look like, but I knew that I was committed to do it. And it literally started that day.
So why is advocacy so critical in this fight against breast cancer?
Oh my goodness. Now, actually, more than ever, as we know, the challenge, I think, is that it's difficult to get people to understand what's really needed in breast cancer. There's so many conspiracy theories. Advocates have the opportunity to put a face on the disease. They have the opportunity to share information that most average people would not get. So it's important to, I think, not only be an advocate, but in some cases, you need to become an activist. And the distinction that I would make is an advocate is someone who is saying that they support having funding, getting research, things like that. Whereas an activist pushes back on misinformation, information that's not science and evidence-based. And that's where I think, my skills have really grown in the time that I've been an advocate.
Do you feel that being an activist moves you more towards action, like real action, versus advocacy?
Abs- well, it's all a part of advocacy, in my opinion. I think that those advocates who become activists have spent some time in the space. And because of what we know is sometimes a slow going process, sometimes it's not outward facing in terms of the community to know exactly how much is being done. And in some cases, not as much is being done as we think should be done. And that's where the action takes place. And I look at it from the standpoint of what am I doing on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis to make a difference? Can I look back each month and see that I've done something to move that needle? And that's the distinction that I make between an advocate and an activist.
Yes, I agree. It's always something that we can be doing daily to push the agenda ahead. So I totally agree with that. What are some of the challenges that you think, some of the big challenges in breast cancer advocacy today?
They just got more challenging in the past almost month, right? There's not enough research being done. There are not enough people being included, particularly women and men of color, being included in the clinical trials, the tests that are being done to determine if medication is going to work, it's going to make a difference. Um, that's been going on for a long time. In fact, I find it interesting that there is so much conversation about not having the right kinds of patients. And yet I feel like we're almost as far back as we were 5 or 10 years ago when I first started hearing about it, because it's really not a whole lot being done that's different. There's a lot of lip service around it, but I'm not sure there's a great deal of action. So that's one of the large challenges. I think what we're about to face in the next weeks and months, and certainly within the next 4 years, if not longer, is just making sure that people have access to care and that researchers have the freedom to do the research that they need to do. If they're silenced, that is going to be devastating for our community. Devastating. It is going to be difficult to make up. Remember, I said in some cases, the science isn't moving as fast as we'd like it to. Imagine slowing that down or preventing scientists from having the opportunity to do the work they need to do, have the funds they need to. It could be really devastating to anyone. Certainly, having been diagnosed with breast cancer in the more recent weeks and months, but it also will have an even more dire impact on people who are living with metastatic breast cancer, stage 4, where there's no cure.
Totally agree with that. Can you share a moment, Marilyn, in your advocacy that made you realize the power of this movement?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So as you mentioned, you shared, I'm from Virginia. And in Virginia, when I started with the Virginia Breast Cancer Foundation actually, I wasn't even on the board. I just went to my first National Breast Cancer Lobby Day that year. And the thing that I find interesting is that through the work that the National Breast Cancer Coalition has done to educate breast cancer advocates, the reception to us coming in and wanting to take the time to share with them the priorities that we have as an organization and all of the other grassroots organizations nationwide, it was impressive to say the least. Our organization has a very rich history and deep reputation for being measured. They know that we focus on evidence-based centered science, and they were willing to listen to us. They always have been. That was one of the impacts. Another had to do with Virginia legislation. The Virginia Breast Cancer Foundation had been focusing on really supporting, obviously, access to care. And when the opportunity for our governor at the time to put forth a bill to expand Medicaid, that happened. We had been lobbying for it for a few years, certainly before I even started. And I was able to actually go to the Capitol and stand on the steps as it was being signed. It was a small, if we look at the total scheme of things nationwide, but for the state of Virginia, that was a big deal. A lot of states have chosen not to do that. And it will make a difference. In fact, it made a huge difference at the time to hundreds of thousands of people in Virginia who did not have access
Wow. Marquita
to
Bass.
Medicare before Medicaid.
Marquita,
So Medicaid expansion was important.
Marquita Bass made a statement, and she says, I hear what is being done. I hear what is being said about not enough research being done. However, billions of dollars have been raised for research. I don't understand.
Yeah. So here's the thing, Marquita, I can understand that. In fact, I hear that a lot. There's a lot of apathy in the world at large with people saying all this time and we still don't have an end to breast cancer. It's not that simple. It really isn't. What has happened that has been significant over the years, and yes, it does take time, is that treatment and therapies have been developed that have helped people to live who otherwise might not have. And that started essentially with Herceptin, made a huge difference to the number of women who, prior to that treatment and therapy being available, they weren't surviving. So it is a long process. It is dispersed. Here's what it's not. It's not what we experienced during COVID in 2020. In 2020, the federal government said, we will coordinate with all of the entities that need to be involved in order for us to come to a solution that prevents people en masse. A lot of people did, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been if we did not have that collaboration. That doesn't exist outside of someone, in this case, it was the federal government, coming together and pulling in pharma and all the necessary entities, and they did it in record time. What do you think would happen to breast cancer if we could have that happen? If we could have someone say, it is so important for us to actually finally find a solution to end breast cancer, and most importantly, to stop people from dying of metastasis. If we could have that level of collaboration, it would be fantastic. It doesn't work like that. It is being done in research hospitals all over the country, but it's not one mandate. If that makes any sense. And it is also a very complicated disease.
Wow. And Kenya said that she agrees with the statement that was made by her as well. I wanted to be while we're on the subject of research, I wanted to talk about Project Lead because it does educate advocates on the science when it comes to breast cancer. So sometimes when we hear what's going on, out in public or in the world, we think one thing when it comes to research, but when you actually sit down in this particular institute, you get to learn a lot more about it because my opinion changed about research. I'm like, why is we collecting all this money when it comes to research and nothing is being done? And then when I got to sit as a peer review, I said, wait a minute, yes, something is being done. Something is being done with research. It's just not being done fast enough. But it is being
Correct.
done. I do see it. So I think with Project Lead, as an advocate, you get to have a seat at the table when it comes to seeing the science behind the research. So I wanted to talk about what is Project Lead, and how and why is this important for advocates?
I would agree with you, indeed, Rochelle. My experience with Project Lead was eye-opening as well. Number one, it started with the pre-work, which was rigorous to say the least. And that is really the word that kept being used whenever somebody said to you, what is Project Lead? Oh, it's this very rigorous, intense class. So it's a 6-day class at NBCC's Project Lead Institute. Takes place in July, last week of July into the beginning of August. Advocates who attend learn a great deal about basic science. They also learn about principles of genetics, evidence-based healthcare, cancer immunology, all the things that make up the elements of what would have an advocate be stronger than, say, the average advocate. So, for example, had I just followed my desire to get involved, I would have been involved in organizations that do support, and we certainly need organizations who do support. The distinction, I think, when you look at the skill set that is built attending Project Lead, you learn beyond that. You understand breast cancer has not had an absolute cure. That's not something I had any clue about. Like most people, I wanted to know why, after all this money, after all these years, haven't we ended this disease? And one, it's complicated. And if you understand the science of the way in which the breast cancer operates in your body, you'll understand some of that. You'll understand the biology of breast cancer. And all of that comes to help you have a more broadened perspective of what it is, and why we still have so much work to do. I will say, however, that like you doing peer review work, it helps you understand that because those proposals, particularly the ones that we've had the opportunity to sit on panels to do, because they're under the congressionally directed breast cancer research program, there is a mandate that the science that's being proposed in those proposals, in those grants, has to be above and beyond. It can average, it cannot be just an incremental change in breast cancer, in the breast cancer science world. It has to be overarching. It has to have major impact. That helps. And when you see the proposals that don't do that, you understand why we're not there yet, right? And that is where advocates who've been trained, educated to know what to look for, can provide feedback, and valuable feedback, that if the proposal isn't accepted and in the peer review process, we don't make that decision, but at least that information gets to the next level, which is programmatic review. But the idea of the information going back to the researchers to let them know, the scientists to let them know, your proposal did not meet the criteria. And if it didn't meet the criteria, obviously it wouldn't be accepted. And you wouldn't, in fact, receive the grant. That is only done when you have educated advocates who are part of that process. Having that seat at the table is critical. And it's having the seat at the table and knowing what to do when you're there.
So Project Lead gives advocates a stronger voice when it comes to breast cancer research. So I totally agree with you. I had a chance to do Project Lead, and I was like, at the beginning of the class, I was like, oh my goodness, like this is a lot. It's a lot coming from, if you're just coming from the advocate standpoint. But once you get to
Correct.
the end of that six-day program, you're just like, wow, you understand it. You walk away with a different respect for those who are doing research when you go home. So I think that every advocate should take it, just so we can have a better understanding of breast cancer, the foundation of breast cancer, and how research moves along.
Yes, and then follow on. Once you graduate from Project Lead, you have the opportunity and you have access to webinars that break down some of those more complex subjects even more deeply. And that's an ongoing thing as a member of the National Breast Cancer Coalition.
So
we want to make sure, go ahead.
No,
I'm sorry.
No, finish your thought.
We want advocates, because when you go through Project Lead, I mean, it's a huge fire hose. You know that, right? It's an absolute huge fire hose. And so much of it you gain knowledge of, especially things you didn't already know, but some of it just is not going to stick because it was only 6 days. However, you have the opportunity to build on that knowledge as a part of additional webinars that break one subject that you spent maybe a half day on. You actually have time to go back and review that webinar as often as you like.
Yes. Marquita said, after attending NBCC's Project Lead, I learned the difference between advocacy that targets legislative change and research advances versus patient advocacy that targets encouraging patients to advocate for their care and is designed to educate patients about treatment options.
Yes. And they are different. They are all equally important. It changed your life, Marquita. Great.
Yes.
Awesome.
And Kenya say everybody should take advantage of Project Lead. It's very informative and educational.
Correct. I would agree with all of you.
So what's the application process?
And I say that as a current mentor, but go on.
What's the application process like for someone who may benefit from attending?
The application information is available online at the nationalbreastcancercoalition.com. That's number one. Number two, if you know someone who has gone through that process, one, you could ask them. You can certainly reach out to me. I'll share some information at the end. The thing that I would love to see is the Project Lead community, if you will, the alum of Project Lead, really come together as, if nothing else, like a reunion. One, because we're going to really need the voices and we're going to need to be even louder. And our strategy is not going to be the same as what we've used in the past. At least I don't believe it'll be identical to what we've done in the past, based on what we are facing right now with the challenges to everything oriented. The process is to fill out the application, be as thorough as you can be, and then that group of people is culled down. I'm not a part of that decision. What I am is a mentor, and I have been for several years now. And I enjoy the opportunity to work with people who, women and men, who say, I want to take my advocacy to the next level. And I always ask, what do you want to do next? What do you want to do with that advocacy? Why do you want to be a part of the National Breast Cancer Coalition? And how do you see yourself in the next 3-5 years or so? And what you think, what kind of a difference you think you can make as we move forward. So I love the idea that people want to attend. I'm a strong advocate for getting people to come to the summit, which is our premier oncology and legislation and public policy conference.
Awesome. So the information is right here on the screen, you guys. You can go to the website stopbreastcancer.org and look for Project Lead and get started so that you could be in California come July 27th. So most of us have completed Project Lead, the advocates move on to the Leadership Summit. And the way that I heard about the Leadership Summit with NBCC is from Project Lead, from some of the advocates that was there. And they like, are you going in May to Lobby Day? And I'm like, what? What is that about? Like, I didn't know anything about it. But because they were talking about it, it piqued my interest. And then I was like, let me see what this is about. And then I was like, I'm gonna make sure that I'm there in May. And when May came, I was there. So I was excited about that. And I also learned about doing a peer review when I was at Project Lead, because I didn't know anything about that either. The advocates was talking about that. And I wanted to know any and everything that I could do to take my advocacy to the next level. So you learn so much
Correct.
at Project Lead about other things that are going on with NBCC. So I know that the summit is one of those things, and it's coming up, and I know a lot of advocates will benefit from that. So let's talk about NBCC's Advocate Leadership Summit that's coming up May 3rd through the 6th in Washington, D.C.
So there are a couple of things, and I'll step back and say the National Breast Cancer Coalition has a couple of major missions, one of which is to educate advocates to be better advocates in the work that they do for breast cancer. And that can come in a number of forms. It can be they decide that they want to go the research route and that they want to be able to have a seat at the table to evaluate these grants that are designed to provide some kind of impact, hopefully major impact with breast cancer. And then the other arm of the organization focuses largely on public policy and legislation. And I will tell you that there's not another organization, and I've been doing this now for a minute, that legislative and public policy the way the National Breast Cancer Coalition does. I mentioned earlier, when we go to the Hill, when I call to request an appointment, the people with whom I'm speaking were not there in 1991 when NBCC started. They weren't there in the early 2000s when a lot of inroads were made because of the advocacy work that NBCC did, but they'd heard about it. Most people know what the National Breast Cancer Coalition is, what they've done, how serious and how absolutely focused on ending breast cancer the organization is. So the summit is our conference that pulls all of those things together. You will have an opportunity to learn about the latest research information, what that science is, what it isn't, if you will. I think probably the most exciting part for me is the opportunity to break out in smaller sessions that give you a chance to learn skills. It's a skill building opportunity. I think we'll have a workshop around, for lack of a word, breast cancer one-on-one. We kind of go back to that every other year or so. We will have a workshop specifically focused on how do I, as a new advocate, learn the skills I need to be able to go to Capitol Hill. You know what it was like, Rochelle. Yes. There's a little bit of nervousness about talking to these people because you think that they know a whole lot that you don't. They don't, by the way. I think it was former President Barack Obama that says, sometimes when you're in these rooms, you think before you have the opportunity that these people have so much more knowledge than you. That is not the case. And it's not the case for a reason with NBCC, because we do in-depth training with anyone who is going to go to Capitol Hill. You will never go alone. That's number one. You will always have a team leader or state field coordinator who is really doing the heavy lifting. We want you there to be able to share just a tidbit of your story. We want them to see the face of someone who's living with metastatic disease. Then we have their attention. That's typically the way it works. Once you get their attention, you can then talk to them about either the public policy, making sure that they understand that we want to make sure that everyone has access to care and quality care. And then we have a bill that we authored back in, I think we were talking about it in 2017, but it authored in 18 and introduced in 2019. And what that bill does is we're really asking to eliminate some what we feel are arbitrary waiting periods to prevent, or that actually prevents people who are metastatic and are younger than 65 from having access to those funds at the time that they've been diagnosed. And the thing about it that's so interesting is everyone when you get their attention and you explain to them what this bill is, you also remind them that this is similar to a bill that did pass in the 117th Congress, I think, bill about ALS, doing the exact same thing, almost identical same thing. And what I find fascinating is when you explain to them what this bill does and how absolutely simple it is, most will say, I cannot believe that this hasn't gone farther than it is. Most will say that. Now, I will say in the last Congress, we got closer than we ever have in terms of gaining the number of members in the House and the number of members in the Senate. It was over 270 in the House, bipartisan, which is what we seek to do, and then more than 30 in the Senate. That's more than half. So the idea is, yes, we will go back. Yes, we will reintroduce the bill again, probably in the next couple of weeks, and we will keep going. I will say it is emotional when you're really passionate about it, that you're getting closer and closer to the fourth quarter, and we're not over that hump. The good news is we start the year even stronger than we were years because we got so far. Our bill had more than 99% support of any other bill that was introduced because not very much got done in the 118th Congress. So we have some successes. We will take those with us. A lot of that comes from the training that you receive, some of which you will get at the summit. The thing about the summit that I would never want to miss is I don't want to miss the networking opportunity about the science. It's one thing, I go to San Antonio. I have been for the last several years to SABCS. I've also gone to the conference that happens in June, ASCO in Chicago. And those are great. And the science is great. And you are in a large room, the size of sometimes multiple football fields, depending on which conference you attend. And you don't have the opportunity to ask the scientists the kinds of questions that you do at the summit. So I would hope that you all consider, you who are graduates. I don't know when you attended the summit last, but I'm hoping that you consider attending this year. I will tell you that applications for scholarships close on March 3rd. So you've got a couple of weeks, but you don't want to wait all your 2 weeks. But I hope that you do attend. We would love to have you.
Yes. What advice would you give to listeners who want to get involved in breast cancer advocacy, but they don't know where to start?
Great question. I would first try to find someone in your local geographic area. But don't feel that you, and the reason I say that is because I did that. I reached out to a small organization, but the organization is a part of a larger network, and it wasn't positive. I didn't get any feedback. I didn't get a call back, to be honest. So you can run down a path and find that, that wasn't very successful. So what you might want to do is reach out to someone who has gone through this process. Start there. And also, once you understand what advocacy means, you have to decide what it means to you. What do you want to do? Because I will say it has taken me a while to kind of focus on a niche because it is a lot of things. And you cannot do all of those things at once. There is, of course, what I call support advocacy. And there are organizations that are doing a bang-up job, meaning really great, in identifying ways to support and care for people in their community. That is advocacy at its best when that works well. There's also the kind of advocacy that the National Breast Cancer Coalition does. You will not hear us from the podium. There will not be a small group workshop that focuses on support, because that's not the kind of advocacy that NBCC does. It doesn't mean that as an individual, I don't support that in my community, because I absolutely do. But we focus on science, evidence-based science, and we focus on making sure that advocates who participate with us are stronger, they're actual information, and they're not just going off of the last headline that you saw. In fact, a few years ago, I don't know that it's going to be included this year, but a few years ago, and I know multiple summits, we actually had someone there, a journalist, in a workshop where we learned how to discern whether or not information was just blowing smoke, or if it in fact had some science behind it, right? And how you know how to distinguish between the two. So those are the kinds of things we want. We want advocates who are well-trained, who can read an article and maybe do a little more research, and then decide, is this accurate? Or was it written in a way to get attention, which is what media is designed to do, right? So that's kind of one of the examples. That's what I think you will gain from it.
Wow.
I see the question, will we have to start from square? Yes, we will. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we will. And it's not our first year or our second or our third. I'm told that some bills can take to get passed. Yeah, that was then. That was when you had a House and Senate where people came together on common issues and common goals. That has not been the case for a few years. But yes, we will start from scratch. I will tell you, though, we're a little ahead because we do have the leads on both sides of the House for both the House bill as well as the Senate bill. And getting those early, getting their buy-in to be our lead sponsors is important. So we're ahead of the game. We don't wait until the 11th hour. We get started early. So we did that, and Rochelle and I were on the Hill a few weeks ago, making sure that we were sort of greasing the skids, if you will, so that we'd start all over.
What upcoming advocacy efforts or events should listeners be aware of?
I think depending on what you want to do, if you have new people listening who think they want to be an advocate, I strongly encourage them to, if they cannot attend this summit, but they think they can make it on Lobby Day, which is May 7th, consider doing that. You'll do it with a group. You won't be doing it by yourself. You'll be doing it as a part of another group. And if you cannot do the summit, it's challenging in some ways because it's the early part of May. But if you really have this as your goal, then early May isn't as big of a deal. If it's not your child graduating, if it's not your family member getting married, and if it's not, and you're not an educator where you are locked into, a schedule based on grades and graduation, then I strongly encourage you to come. So that's number one. Number two, you can't make it to the summit. You've got a little bit more time, of course, to apply to attend Project Lead, to begin to set yourself up for the opportunity to gain the knowledge you need to set yourself apart and to take your advocacy skills to the next level.
Awesome. Marquita had a statement. I want to read it really quick as we wrap up the show. She says she's having challenges remaining encouraged during the current climate. What advice do you have for others who may be feeling?
Marquita, I'm not sure I'm the best person. I am so not sure I'm the best person. Okay, full transparency. I have struggled, and I've truly struggled since November 3rd, to be honest. And I am turning to my pastor. I listened in on a Zoom a couple of nights ago. Another pastor from one of the churches in my geography had a gentleman, an attorney, speak to the group about what's going on legally, what can be done legally, and to encourage us not to lose hope. I am looking for as many of those kinds of opportunities as I can, because by myself, in my own head, when I consume the news, I like explode. And obviously that's not going to be helpful to anyone. So I would say stay within whatever faith you have. I would rely on that. Obviously, this isn't going to be, we can't just sit with our arms crossed and say, oh, God's going to take care of it. He does have the ultimate decision making, but there are actions that are going to have to be taken. And I would just stay tuned for what those actions might be that are positive. I refrain from having a lot of dialogue with the average person, because the average person is just operating on the emotion based on the announcement of the day, right? The news headline of the day, and they are insufferable. There's no question about it. But I just have to stay focused. Rochelle knows that's a part of what we discussed in our training a few weeks ago. We have to stay focused. The noise is always going to be there. Yes, it's louder than absolutely ever, but we've got to stay focused. I don't know if that helps, because as I said, I'm not the best one. I'm not excelling at that right now.
No, those are actually some awesome words of wisdom that we all can live by. So I appreciate that. Marilyn, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight, your wisdom, and your experience with us today. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you so much. You're a rock star. You know that.
Thank
you. You are a rock star. I think I told you that last year when we were in New York. You are. I'm so impressed. Remember, I was there. I wasn't your mentor, unfortunately, but you had an excellent mentor nonetheless. And I look at your trajectory. You came in, you asked questions, you wanted to learn, you had a goal, and you stuck to it. And look at how much you've done in so short an amount of time. You did that. You did that. You took advantage of any knowledge and any opportunity that you could. And I think it is absolutely amazing. And I hope that at some point you can share your journey from your initial plans to be an advocate to where you are now and how different it is.
Yes, I would love to do that. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And I hope you guys, we see you at the summit and that you get to register for Project Lead. Thank you, Marilyn.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. You guys, please don't go anywhere. Coming up next is Pillow Talk with God right here on Intellectual Radio. As always, thank you for tuning in to Warriors Talk. I'll leave you with these words of wisdom. When you see something that's not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something. That quote is by John Lewis. Join me next Monday right here on Intellectual Radio at 6 p.m. My special guest would be Doc Michelle. As always, thank you for tuning in to Warriors Talk with author and founder Lady Rochelle, where we are changing lives one warrior at a time.
Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Warriors Talk with Lady Rochelle. To find out more about Warriors Talk, follow @Warriors